The emergency alarm screamed through the halls of the Galactic Council station. Ambassador Kethvar's blue skin turned pale as he rushed to the communications center. In his 300 years of service, he had never heard the emergency system activate with such urgency. The main screen flickered to life, showing a being he recognized immediately. High Counselor Zara Nell of the Zalani Federation appeared on screen, but she looked nothing like the calm, wise leader Kethvar remembered. Her normally pristine white robes were torn and stained. Her large, gentle eyes were wide with terror. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Anyone who can hear this message. We need help." They came from nowhere. We call them the Devourers. Around the communication center, representatives from dozens of species gathered. The Altrurian Empire, the Silicon Collective, the Hive Worlds, all stopped their daily business to listen. The Zalani Federation was known throughout the galaxy for their peaceful ways and incredible medical knowledge. They had never asked for military help before. "Our world of Zalani Prime is gone," Zara Nell continued, tears streaming down her face. "They stripped it bare in 3 days, everything. The trees, the grass, the animals, even the bacteria in the soil. Nothing remains but dead rock," the audience gasped. Kethvar felt sick. Zalani Prime had been home to 12 billion souls. It was a garden world, famous for its beauty and the kindness of its people. "Zalani Secondary fell yesterday," the High Counselor went on. 8 billion more of our people are gone. We managed to evacuate some to our last world, Zalani Final. But they are coming. We estimate 3 days before they arrive." General Vox Prime of the Galactic Defense Force stepped forward. He was a massive being from the warrior planet Craig 7. His voice was deep and confident. "High Counselor, we will send our best fleets immediately." "How many ships do these Devourers have?" Zara Nell shook her head. "You don't understand. They don't use ships like we do. They are the ships. Living creatures the size of battle cruisers. But they think and learn and adapt. Every weapon we used against them, they became immune to within hours. Every strategy we tried, they countered before we could complete it." The room fell silent. The Galactic Defense Force was the most powerful military in known space. Their technology was based on thousands of years of warfare against every possible enemy. But an enemy that could adapt to everything, that was beyond their experience. "We have studied every species in the galaxy," Zara Nell said desperately. "We have looked at every military strategy, every weapon system, every defensive method. There is only one species that might be able to help us." General Vox Prime stood straighter. "Name them. We will contact them immediately." "Humans." The word hit the room like a bomb. Silence stretched for long seconds. Then several representatives began talking at once. "Humans." General Vox Prime sounded confused. "The primitive species from Earth? They barely have faster-than-light travel. They are violent and unpredictable," added Ambassador Silith from the Reptilian Concordat. "They fight each other constantly. They have no advanced technology." Kethvar remained quiet, but his mind was racing. He remembered something from 50 years ago. A small conflict in the Proxima system. Pirates had taken over 3 worlds and were demanding tribute from passing ships. The Galactic Defense Force had been ready to send 2 full fleets to deal with them. Then Earth had offered to help. They sent 12 humans in a single small ship. Just 12. The Galactic Council had almost refused, thinking it was a joke. But they were curious about the new species, so they agreed. The humans had ended the pirate threat in 6 days. Not by fighting, not by using superior weapons. They had somehow convinced the pirates to surrender and turn themselves in. The reports were so strange that most people thought they were fiction. The humans had used something they called psychological warfare, combined with tactics so unusual that even the pirates couldn't understand what was happening to them. "High Counselor," Kethvar spoke up. "What makes you think humans can help when our combined fleets cannot?" Zara Nell looked directly at him. "We studied their history. Humans have one trait that no other species we know possesses. When faced with impossible situations, they don't accept that they are impossible. They think in ways that seem random, even insane, but somehow they find solutions." She paused, gathering herself. "We call it tactical unpredictability. Every other species we know fights according to logical patterns. Even when we try to be unpredictable, we follow mathematical models. But humans seem to operate outside normal logic entirely." General Vox Prime was clearly not convinced. "Even if that were true, they have no experience with threats like this. The Devourers have consumed entire civilizations across 3 galaxies. What could primitive humans possibly do? I don't know, Zaranel admitted. But we are going to die anyway. Our last projections show that even if every species in the Galactic Council sent their entire fleets, the Devourers would adapt to our combined technology within days. We would just be feeding them more resources. She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of each representative. Humans fight wars differently than we do. They use methods that seem wasteful, illogical, even cruel by our standards. But they win wars that should be unwinnable. Kethvar was thinking about the Proxima incident again. The reports had been classified, but he had read them. The humans hadn't just defeated the pirates. They had somehow convinced them that continuing their criminal activities was pointless. Several of the pirate leaders had actually asked to join Earth's diplomatic service afterward. The techniques used were described as advanced psychological manipulation, combined with strategic empathy and controlled application of chaos theory. Kethvar had no idea what most of those words meant, but the results spoke for themselves. There is one more thing, Zaranel said quietly. The Devourers are not just destroying our worlds. They are studying us, learning from us. Each world they consume makes them smarter, more adaptable. If they finish with our Federation, they will have learned everything we know about galactic civilization. The implications hit everyone at once. The Devourers wouldn't stop with the Zilani Federation. They would move on to other worlds, other species, and each victory would make them stronger and more dangerous. General Vox Prime was clearly struggling with the decision. Military pride warred with practical necessity. Finally, he spoke. Even if we contact Earth, why would they help? They barely participate in galactic affairs. What do they gain by fighting an enemy that has already proven unstoppable? Ambassador Kethvar surprised himself by answering. Because they are humans, he said simply. From what I have observed, they help because someone needs help. Logic and self-interest seem to be secondary considerations for them. The debate continued for hours, but the conclusion was inevitable. The Galactic Defense Force would be prepared and sent as backup, but the official request for help would go to Earth. As the meeting ended and the message was prepared, Kethvar couldn't shake a strange feeling. Either they were about to witness the most spectacular failure in galactic history, or they were about to learn something fundamental about warfare that would change everything. 3 days later, Earth's response arrived. It was not what anyone expected. Admiral Sarah Chen stared at the message from the Galactic Council for the 5th time. Around the conference table in Earth's United Defense Command, the other military leaders looked equally puzzled. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, said General Martinez, head of Earth's Special Forces. An enemy that adapts to every weapon and strategy within hours has consumed 2 entire worlds. The most advanced military forces in the galaxy have failed, and they want our help. That's about the size of it, Chen replied. She was a small woman with graying hair, but her reputation in military circles was legendary. She had personally designed Earth's unconventional warfare doctrine after studying thousands of historical battles. What do our analysts say about this enemy? Asked Dr. Patricia Webb, Earth's chief military psychologist. She was Marcus Webb's sister and shared his interest in understanding the minds behind conflicts. Colonel James Morrison, recently returned from mandatory retirement after his controversial tactics in the Mars Rebellion, leaned forward. I've run the data through every military simulation we have. Conventional warfare is useless. The enemy learns too fast. By the time you fire a second shot, they've already figured out how to defend against your weapon. So what do? Asked General Martinez. Send our biggest ships? Our best soldiers? Admiral Chen smiled, and several people around the table looked nervous. That smile usually meant she was about to suggest something that would horrify normal military minds. No, she said simply. We send our most dangerous humans. The room fell silent. General Martinez was the first to speak. Ma'am, with respect, our most dangerous soldiers are already assigned to critical missions. And frankly, if the Galactic Defense Force couldn't handle this threat, I'm not sure what our special forces could accomplish. Who said anything about soldiers? Chen asked. She activated the room's main display. 5 files appeared on screen. The people in the photos looked nothing like elite military personnel. Dr. Marcus Webb, Chen began, pointing to the first photo. It showed a tired-looking man in his 40s with kind eyes and prematurely gray hair. Maximum security prison psychologist. Specializes in treating the most violent criminals in our system. Has a 97% success rate in rehabilitation. General Martinez looked confused. Ma'am, how is a prison psychologist dangerous? He can get inside the mind of anyone, no matter how twisted or alien they're thinking, Chen replied. He finds patterns in behavior that seem completely random. More importantly, he can predict what someone will do before they know it themselves. She moved to the second file. Sarah Kim, former Army Ranger, now runs wilderness survival schools. Kicked out of the military for refusing direct orders during the Australian crisis. What were the orders? Asked Dr. Webb. To evacuate a town before a wildfire hit. She refused because she said the evacuation route would lead people directly into the fire. Command insisted the route was safe according to all computer models. She physically blocked the evacuation vehicles. What happened? The computer models were wrong. The fire jumped the river exactly where Sarah predicted. If they had followed orders, 300 people would have died. Instead, she led them through a path that didn't exist on any map and saved everyone. The third photo showed a man with hard eyes and several visible scars. Colonel James Morrison. You all know him. Court-martialed for developing tactics that violated the rules of warfare. Colonel Morrison shifted uncomfortably. Those rules exist for good reasons, Admiral. Maybe, Chen agreed. But your methods ended the Mars Rebellion in 3 weeks instead of 3 years. How many lives did that save? The court-martial board didn't see it that way. The court-martial board was thinking like normal military officers. This enemy isn't normal. The fourth photo showed a young African woman with bright, intelligent eyes. Kemal Hassan, former child soldier, now works for the International Red Cross, specializes in post-conflict humanitarian operations. How is a humanitarian worker dangerous? General Martinez asked. She survived 6 years of civil war starting when she was 10 years old, not by fighting, but by understanding how different groups think and react under extreme stress. She can predict how entire populations will behave during disasters. More importantly, she knows how to influence those behaviors. The final photo showed a woman with wild curly hair and an intense stare, Dr. Elena Vasquez. Chaos mathematician with severe ADHD, kicked out of 3 universities for disruptive research practices. What kind of research? Dr. Webb asked. She proves that random events aren't random. She finds patterns in systems that everyone else considers completely unpredictable. Weather, stock markets, crowd behavior, she can model it all. General Martinez was shaking his head. Admiral, with all due respect, this sounds like a joke. We're talking about an enemy that has destroyed entire civilizations. You want to send a psychologist, a hiking instructor, a disgraced officer, a social worker, and a mathematician? Admiral Chen's smile grew wider. Exactly. Ma'am, I don't understand. Chen stood and began pacing. The Galactic Council asked for our most dangerous humans. Everyone assumes that means our best soldiers or our most advanced weapons. But that's not what makes humans dangerous. She stopped and looked around the table. What makes humans dangerous is that we don't think like anyone else. Every other species in the galaxy approaches problems logically. They analyze, they plan, they execute according to established protocols. Even when they try to be unpredictable, they follow mathematical models. And that's bad, asked Dr. Webb. Against this enemy? Yes, because this enemy adapts to logical thinking. It learns patterns and counters them. But what if we don't use patterns? What if we approach the problem in ways that seem completely insane? Colonel Morrison was beginning to understand. You want to fight crazy with crazy. I want to fight adaptation with chaos, Chen corrected. Marcus can understand how the enemy thinks. Sarah can find solutions that don't exist on paper. You can develop tactics that violate every rule of engagement. Kemal can predict how entire populations react under stress. Elena can find patterns in apparent randomness. But what's the actual plan? General Martinez pressed. There is no plan, Chen said simply. That's the point. We're going to send 5 people who think in completely different ways and let them figure it out as they go. No predetermined strategy, no backup protocols, no safety net. The room erupted in protests, but Chen raised her hand for silence. Listen to me, she said firmly. Every military force that has faced this enemy has failed because they approached it like a military problem. They sent fleets and armies and weapons. The enemy adapted to all of it. She pointed to the 5 files on screen. These people don't approach problems like military officers. They don't think like anyone else in the galaxy. That's what makes them dangerous. What if they fail? Asked General Martinez quietly. Then they fail, Chen said with a shrug. But if they succeed, we'll have learned something new about warfare. Something that might save not just the Zilani Federation, but everyone. 3 hours later, the 5 most dangerous humans on Earth received their orders. None of them were told exactly what they were supposed to do. They were simply told to solve an impossible problem. Dr. Marcus Webb was in the middle of a therapy session with a serial killer when his communication device buzzed. Sarah Kim was teaching teenagers how to find water in the desert. Colonel Morrison was writing his memoirs in a small cabin in Montana. Kemal Hassan was coordinating refugee camps in Eastern Europe. Dr. Elena Vasquez was trying to predict earthquake patterns while riding a roller coaster for research purposes. Within 12 hours, all 5 were on board Earth's fastest ship, heading toward the last world of the Zilani Federation. They had 2 days to figure out how to defeat an enemy that had already proven unstoppable. On the ship, they began talking. What they discovered about each other and about the problem they faced would change galactic warfare forever. The human transport ship dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Zilani final system. What they saw made everyone on board fall silent. The planet below was beautiful. Blue oceans, green continents, white clouds swirling in perfect patterns. But surrounding it was a sight that defied description. Massive creatures, each the size of a battleship, moved through space like living asteroids. They had no clear shape, constantly shifting and flowing like liquid metal mixed with organic tissue. "Those are the Devourers," whispered High Counselor Zara Nell through the communication link. She had insisted on speaking directly with the human team. "There are thousands of them. They arrived 6 hours ago and have been studying us." Dr. Marcus Webb pressed his face against the viewing port. "They're not attacking yet. Why?" "We think they're learning our defensive patterns before they begin the assault," Zara Nell replied. "It's what they did at our other worlds. They observe for a day, then attack with perfect counters to everything we have." Sarah Kim was studying the tactical displays. "What's the longest any world has held out against them?" 4 days. The planet Kresh 9 had the most advanced military in their sector. The Devourers adapted to everything they had and consumed the entire world. On the bridge of the human ship, the 5 most dangerous humans gathered around a table. To any military observer, they would have looked like refugees rather than Earth's response to a galactic crisis. Dr. Marcus Webb wore a simple sweater and looked like he should be teaching at a university. Sarah Kim was dressed in hiking gear that had seen better days. Colonel Morrison was in civilian clothes. He had refused to wear a military uniform after his court-martial. Kemal Hassan wore the practical clothing of a field worker. Dr. Elena Vasquez had paint stains on her shirt from her latest attempt to visualize chaos patterns through art. "Okay," said Colonel Morrison. "Let's start with what we know. The enemy adapts to any strategy within hours. They learn from observation. They've never been defeated. What else? They consume entire planets," added Sarah Kim. "Not just the people or the cities, everything, even the bacteria in the soil." Dr. Webb was taking notes on an old-fashioned paper notebook. "That suggests they're not just destroying for military reasons. This behavior pattern indicates something deeper." "What do you mean?" asked Kemal Hassan. "In my work with violent criminals, I've learned that extreme behavior usually comes from extreme trauma or need. No one destroys everything unless they're trying to fill some kind of void." Dr. Vasquez was drawing complex diagrams on her tablet. "The consumption pattern isn't random. Look at these planetary destruction sequences. There's a mathematical progression." She showed her work to the others. Even to trained minds, her diagrams looked like abstract art, mixed with advanced mathematics. "They're not just eating planets," she continued excitedly. "They're solving for something. Each world they consume gives them new information, and they're building towards some kind of solution." Sarah Kim was studying the tactical data from previous attacks. Every military force that faced them used standard defensive strategies. Shields, weapon platforms, fleet formations. The Devourers adapted to all of it. "So we don't use standard strategies," said Colonel Morrison. "But what do we use instead?" The 5 humans looked at each other. In a normal military situation, there would be established protocols, backup plans, command structures. Here they had nothing but their own strange minds and the growing certainty that conventional thinking would get everyone killed. Let's start with observation, Dr. Webb suggested. But not the way the Zilani are doing it. They're studying the devourers like scientists studying a natural phenomenon. I want to study them like a psychologist studying a patient. Over the next 4 hours, while the Galactic Defense Fleet continued its futile preparations, the humans did something unprecedented. They began to profile the devourers as if they were dealing with disturbed individuals rather than alien weapons. Dr. Webb noticed that the devourers moved in specific patterns around the planet. Look at this. They're not randomly positioning themselves. There's a social structure here. Some of them are clearly leaders, others followers. Sarah Kim had been watching their approach patterns. They're hunters. Look how they circle the planet. This isn't military strategy. It's pack behavior, which means they can be baited, added Colonel Morrison thoughtfully. Kamal Hassan was studying the psychological profiles of the devourers' previous victims. Every world they attacked tried to negotiate first, then fight when negotiation failed. Standard diplomatic followed by military response. And they adapted to both, noted Dr. Vasquez. But what if we don't follow standard patterns at all? The breakthrough came when Dr. Webb made a disturbing connection. I've been analyzing their behavior patterns, and I think I know what they are. The others gathered around his notes. Every behavior they exhibit matches profile patterns I've seen in severely traumatized individuals. The endless consumption, the need to control everything, the inability to stop even when they've won. This isn't military conquest. This is trauma response on a species-wide scale. You think the devourers are traumatized? Asked Sarah Kim. I think something terrible happened to them, and now they're trying to make sure it never happens again by becoming strong enough to face whatever hurt them originally. Dr. Vasquez was running calculations on her tablet. If that's true, then their adaptation behavior isn't just tactical learning. It's psychological defense mechanism. They adapt because they're terrified of being vulnerable. Which means, said Colonel Morrison slowly, we're not fighting an enemy. We're dealing with a patient. The implications hit all of them at once. Every military force that had faced the devourers had treated them as hostile invaders to be destroyed. But what if they weren't invaders at all? What if they were refugees? This changes everything, whispered Kamal Hassan. You can't defeat trauma with violence. You can only heal it. Sarah Kim was studying the planet's geography. If we're going to try something unprecedented, we need to think about environment. The Zilani world is mostly ocean with several large continents. Lots of islands. What are you thinking? Asked Dr. Webb. I'm thinking about how to hunt the hunters. If they're operating on pack instincts, we can use their own behavior patterns against them. Colonel Morrison was already sketching battle plans that looked nothing like any military strategy in recorded history. What if we don't try to defeat them? What if we try to confuse them so badly that they stop functioning as a unified force? Overload their adaptation protocols, agreed Dr. Vasquez. Present them with so many different variables that their collective intelligence can't process them all. Over the next several hours, while the devourers continued their patient observation and the Galactic Defense Fleet prepared for conventional battle, 5 humans designed the most unusual military operation in recorded history. They called it Operation Madhouse. The plan violated every rule of warfare, every principle of military strategy, and every guideline for dealing with superior forces. It was simultaneously the most compassionate and most ruthless approach anyone had ever conceived. Are we really going to try to psychoanalyze hostile aliens while fighting them? Asked Kamal Hassan. We're going to try to heal hostile aliens while defending against them, corrected Dr. Webb. The fighting is just to get their attention. When they presented their plan to High Counselor Zaranel and the Galactic Defense Command, the response was exactly what they expected. This is insane, declared General Vox Prime. You want to deliberately provoke them into attacking, then use their own psychological trauma against them? This isn't warfare. It's experimental therapy on a galactic scale. Exactly, said all 5 humans at the same time. 6 hours later, the Devourers began their assault on Zilani Final. What happened next would be studied by military historians and psychologists for centuries to come. The attack began exactly as the Devourers had planned. Massive creatures descended from orbit, their adaptive armor already configured to resist every weapon the Zilani possessed. Energy shields absorbed laser fire. Hull modifications deflected kinetic weapons. Bioelectric fields neutralized electromagnetic pulses. For the first hour, it looked like every other world the Devourers had consumed. Defensive positions fell one by one. Evacuation ships fled into space only to be consumed by waiting creatures. The Galactic Defense Fleet engaged and found their weapons useless. Then Operation Madhouse began. Dr. Elena Vasquez had positioned herself in the planet's main communication center. Her job was to overload the Devourers' collective intelligence with impossible mathematical problems. She began broadcasting pure chaos, mathematical equations that had no solutions, geometric patterns that couldn't exist, probability calculations that contradicted themselves. "Attention, Devourers," she said calmly into the communication system. "Please solve this. What is the square root of negative infinity divided by the color blue?" The effect was immediate. Several of the attacking creatures simply stopped moving. Their adaptation protocols, designed to process logical threats and countermeasures, had never encountered deliberate nonsense presented as serious mathematics. While Dr. Vasquez confused their minds, Sarah Kim confused their instincts. She had studied every detail of their attack patterns and identified their pack behavior weaknesses. Using environmental engineering, she began changing the planet's landscape in real time. Controlled avalanches blocked mountain passes that hadn't existed an hour before. Rivers suddenly changed course. Forests appeared where there had been open plains. The Devourers found themselves trying to adapt to an environment that defied physical laws. "How is this possible?" demanded one of the Devourer leaders, its voice a mix of confusion and growing anger. "Terrain cannot change this rapidly without geological catastrophe." "Welcome to human geography," Sarah replied cheerfully through her communication link. "We don't just adapt to our environment. We make our environment adapt to us." Colonel Morrison was handling the military side of the operation, but his tactics would have horrified any conventional officer. Instead of trying to win battles, he was deliberately losing them in specific ways. His forces would attack, get defeated, retreat, then attack again from a completely different angle using entirely different weapons and strategies. Each defeat taught the Devourers how to counter that specific approach, but Morrison never used the same approach twice. "You're learning how to defeat methods I'll never use again," he explained to the confused Devourer forces. "By the time you've adapted to my last strategy, I've already moved on to something completely different." The Devourers had never encountered an enemy that seemed to benefit from losing. Their adaptation protocols were designed to learn from successful defenses, but Morrison was giving them nothing but useless victories. Dr. Marcus Webb was implementing the most dangerous part of the plan. While the others confused and misdirected the Devourers, he was attempting direct psychological contact with their collective consciousness. "I know you're listening," he said quietly, broadcasting on frequencies that bypassed their conscious minds and spoke directly to their deeper psychology. "I know you're afraid. I know something hurt you so badly that you can't stop running from it." The response was immediate and violent. Several Devourers abandoned their tactical objectives and attacked Webb's position directly, but Kamal Hassan was ready for them. She had positioned refugee populations from previous Devourer attacks around Webb's location. When the Devourers saw their former victims not just alive but defending their psychological tormentor, their collective consciousness experienced something they had never felt before: cognitive dissonance. "These are people you consumed," Kamal explained gently to the attacking creatures. "But they're still here, still fighting, still refusing to be defeated, just like you've been doing for centuries." The creatures slowed, then stopped. For the first time in their existence, the Devourers were forced to confront the fact that their victims were not so different from themselves. Dr. Vasquez's chaos mathematics were having an even stranger effect. The Devourers' adaptation abilities were designed to find patterns and counter them, but her deliberate randomness was forcing them to create patterns where none existed. Their collective intelligence was literally inventing problems to solve. "You're trying so hard to adapt to randomness that you're becoming random yourselves," she observed, watching their behavior on her monitors. "You're starting to contradict your own adaptation protocols." The breakthrough came when several Devourers began adapting to contradictory threats simultaneously. Their biomechanical forms couldn't maintain conflicting adaptations, and they began to break down on a cellular level. But instead of dying, something unexpected happened. The breakdown forced them to access memory systems they had buried for millennia. Suddenly, individual devourers began remembering who they had been before they became part of the collective consciousness. "I was a teacher," whispered one creature, its voice filled with wonder and horror. "I taught children about mathematics and art. I had a name. I had a family. I was a farmer," said another. "I grew food for my community. I loved watching plants grow." More and more devourers began recovering buried memories. The collective consciousness that had driven them to consume entire worlds was fracturing as individuals remembered their original identities. But the recovery was traumatic. Centuries of repressed memories were flooding back all at once. Many of the creatures began experiencing psychological breakdown on a massive scale. Dr. Webb immediately switched from offensive psychological warfare to emergency therapy. "Listen to me," he said urgently, broadcasting to all of them at once. "You're remembering traumatic events. This is normal. You don't have to face this alone." "We killed them," sobbed one of the larger creatures. "We killed our own people. We consumed our own children." "No," Webb said firmly. "You survived. Something else killed them. And you survived by becoming something you never wanted to be. But survival isn't a crime." Kamal Hassan began coordinating refugee support operations. But instead of helping displaced populations, she was providing psychological support to creatures the size of battleships. "You don't have to keep running," she told them. "You don't have to keep consuming worlds to feel safe. There are other ways to deal with trauma." The battle had transformed into the strangest therapy session in galactic history. Massive creatures that had terrorized entire civilizations were crying, remembering, and slowly beginning to heal from psychological wounds that were thousands of years old. But not all of the devourers were ready to face their buried memories. A faction of the collective consciousness resisted the therapeutic intervention and tried to reassert control. "We cannot be weak," declared the devourer leadership. "Weakness led to our destruction before. We will not be vulnerable again." "Healing isn't weakness," Dr. Webb replied. "Healing is how you become strong enough to face what hurt you originally." "What hurt us originally is still out there," the leaders responded. "Beyond the rim of this galaxy. They are coming. They are always coming. We must be ready." That revelation changed everything. The devourers weren't just traumatized survivors. They were refugees fleeing from something even worse. Their endless consumption wasn't random violence. It was desperate preparation for a threat that was still hunting them. "What is out there?" asked Colonel Morrison. The answer would force humanity to confront a threat that made the devourers look like frightened children. The revelation came from the oldest of the devourers, a creature that had once been the leader of an entire civilization. As its memories returned, so did the knowledge of what had driven them to become monsters. They called themselves the Harvesters, the ancient being whispered, its voice carrying the weight of millennia of terror. They came from the dark space between galaxies. They consumed not just worlds but entire solar systems. They fed on stellar energy itself. Dr. Marcus Webb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. "How long ago was this?" 5,000 of your years. They swept through our galaxy like a plague. Billions of civilizations died. We were one of the last holdouts." The creature's biomechanical form shuddered as more memories surfaced. "We tried everything. Weapons, shields, evacuation. Nothing worked. In desperation, our scientists created a collective consciousness technology. We merged our entire species into a single entity that could adapt and evolve in real time." "But something went wrong," Dr. Webb prompted gently. "The technology worked too well. We became so focused on adaptation and survival that we lost our individual identities. Worse, the trauma of watching our galaxy die became encoded into our collective memory. We couldn't stop preparing for their return." Sarah Kim was studying galactic charts on her tablet. "Where are these harvesters now?" "They consumed everything in our galaxy, then moved on. But they follow predictable patterns. They return to harvested galaxies every 10,000 years to collect any new growth." Dr. Elena Vasquez was already running calculations. 5,000 years since they left, 10,000-year cycles. "That means they're coming back," finished the ancient devourer. "Our deep space sensors detected the early signs 3 years ago. Stellar energy patterns being drained from the galactic rim. They'll reach the core systems within 50 years. The implications hit everyone at once. The devourers hadn't been randomly destroying worlds. They had been trying to prepare the galaxy for a threat that would make their own rampage look insignificant. You were trying to make everyone strong enough to fight them, Kemal Hassan said with sudden understanding. We were trying to become strong enough ourselves, the Ancient One corrected. But the trauma made us forget that strength comes from unity, not isolation. We became the very thing we were trying to defend against. Colonel Morrison was already thinking tactically. How do we fight something that consumes stellar energy? You don't fight them, said another devourer, one who had been a scientist in its original life. They exist on scales we can barely comprehend. Individual planets are meaningless to them. They harvest entire star systems as easily as you might pick fruit. But you survived them once, pointed out Dr. Webb. Barely, and only by sacrificing everything we were. The 5 humans looked at each other. They had solved one impossible problem, only to discover an even more impossible one. But something about the situation felt familiar. You know what this reminds me of? Said Dr. Vasquez suddenly. The chaos mathematics I work with. The harvesters aren't random destroyers. They're following mathematical patterns. Predictable cycles, systematic harvesting, ordered consumption. What are you thinking? Asked Sarah Kim. I'm thinking that anything that follows patterns can be disrupted by introducing chaos into the system. Dr. Webb was nodding slowly. And trauma that's been repressed for thousands of years can be healed if you're willing to face it directly. We can't defeat the harvesters militarily, added Colonel Morrison. But we might not need to defeat them at all. What do you mean? Asked the ancient devourer. Kemal Hassan was the first to understand. You ran from trauma for 5,000 years and it turned you into monsters. But when you finally faced that trauma, you started healing. What if the same is true for the harvesters? You want to psychoanalyze beings that consume stars? The devourer sounded incredulous. We want to understand why beings that powerful need to consume anything at all, corrected Dr. Webb. In my experience, the need to consume everything usually comes from feeling empty inside. Over the next several hours, while the galaxy's military forces prepared for conventional warfare against an impossible enemy, 5 humans and a group of reformed world destroyers designed the most audacious plan in the history of the universe. They would not fight the harvesters. They would not try to hide from them. Instead, they would attempt to heal psychological trauma on an intergalactic scale. This is beyond insane, declared General Vox Prime when he heard the plan. You want to provide therapy to beings that eat solar systems? We want to find out why beings that powerful feel the need to eat anything, Dr. Webb replied calmly. Destruction on that scale doesn't come from strength. It comes from a wound so deep that nothing can fill it. The preparation took months. The devourers, now functioning as individuals again while maintaining their collective abilities, became the galaxy's early warning system. Their deep space sensors could detect harvester approach patterns decades before conventional technology. Dr. Vasquez worked with devourer scientists to create chaos mathematics on an interstellar scale. If the harvesters operated on predictable patterns, she would give them problems that had no solutions. Sarah Kim coordinated with every species in the galaxy to create environmental changes that would force the harvesters to constantly adapt their consumption patterns. Not to stop them, but to slow them down and make them think. Colonel Morrison developed tactical scenarios that violated every known law of warfare. His job wasn't to defeat an enemy, but to confuse them so thoroughly that they would be forced to communicate instead of simply consuming. Kemal Hassan prepared refugee support operations for an entire galaxy. Her plan was to evacuate not just populations, but entire ways of thinking to safe areas where they could be preserved regardless of what happened. Dr. Webb prepared for the most challenging therapy session in history. He would attempt to establish psychological contact with beings whose minds operated on scales beyond human comprehension. 47 years later, the harvesters arrived. They came not as ships or armies, but as living darkness between the stars. Vast entities that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions humans couldn't perceive. They began consuming outer rim star systems exactly as predicted, but something was different this time. Instead of finding helpless civilizations waiting to be harvested, they found a galaxy that refused to make sense. Mathematical chaos flooded their perception systems. Stellar engineering projects changed the gravitational patterns they relied on for navigation. Entire populations disappeared and reappeared in locations that shouldn't exist. Most confusing of all, they encountered resistance that seemed designed to fail. Military forces attacked them with weapons that couldn't possibly work, then retreated while broadcasting messages of welcome and offers of help. For the first time in their existence, the harvesters slowed their consumption to study what they were encountering. That was when Dr. Marcus Webb made contact. "I know you're listening," he said quietly, broadcasting on frequencies that touched something deeper than thought. "I know you're hungry. I know you're empty. I know nothing you consume ever fills the hole inside you." The response shook star systems. "You cannot comprehend our purpose." "Maybe not," Webb agreed. "But I understand pain. I understand emptiness. I understand what it feels like when nothing you do makes the hurt stop. We do not hurt. We harvest, we preserve, we continue. You consume because you're afraid that if you stop, you'll disappear," Webb said gently. "But you disappeared a long time ago. What you're trying to preserve died eons ago. You're just afraid to grieve for it." What happened next changed the fundamental nature of the universe. The harvesters stopped. For the first time in millions of years, beings that fed on the energy of stars simply stopped. And in that silence, they began to remember what they had been before hunger consumed them. The therapy session that followed lasted 3 years and involved the combined efforts of every psychologist, philosopher, and spiritual leader in the galaxy. It was messy, dangerous, and often terrifying, but slowly, painfully, the harvesters began to heal. They had once been the caretakers of entire galactic clusters, nurturing young civilizations and protecting developing worlds. But cosmic catastrophe had destroyed everything they cared for, leaving them empty and desperate. Their consumption hadn't been malicious. It had been a desperate attempt to preserve something, anything, of what they had lost. But trauma had twisted their preservation instinct into endless destruction. The healing process was far from perfect. Some harvesters couldn't face their original nature and retreated to dark space between galaxies. Others chose to sleep for eons while their psyches slowly recovered, but many chose a different path. With the Devourer's help, they began learning how to nurture again instead of consuming. Star systems that had been drained were slowly restored. Dead worlds were reseeded with life. Earth became the galaxy's unofficial department of impossible problems. When civilizations encountered threats that couldn't be solved by conventional means, they called for humanity's most dangerous asset, 5 people who refused to accept that any problem was truly unsolvable. Admiral Chen's final report to the Galactic Council was classified at the highest levels, but one paragraph was eventually released.